I'm John Duval. Welcome to the Scriptural Way Bible Study. The Scriptural Way Bible Study is brought to you by the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ, located at 16300 North May Avenue, Oklahoma City. On behalf of the elders and members of the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ, I would like to thank you for your interest in spiritual matters. Now, let's take our Bibles and seek the Scriptural way. Good evening. I'm John Duvall.
I'm Dale Decker.
And I'm John Hall.
This is a Scriptural Way broadcast. We're so glad that you were able to join us for our study this evening. It's good to have you here with us. Dale, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for asking.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
And how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Great.
Doing well. John, how about yourself?
Welcome back, John.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I got lost. I couldn't find my way back.
Really?
Made it.
Would you finally pull over and ask for directions like your wife was telling you to do?
Yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad you made it back. It's good to have all three of us back behind the desk again as we continue to seek the Scriptural way in all things that the Bible teaches. Last week, we're going to back up for just a minute before we get into tonight's study. Let me do say this: if you haven't downloaded a PDF copy of tonight's study, What Does the Bible Say About a Christian's Apparel? Please feel free to go ahead and do that. And we will be getting into that subject here in just a few moments. We had I got an email from Jacob Gwynn. Jacob and his father, and I should say Jacob's father, Greg Gwynn and Jacob, they host an internet-only Bible study called thevirtualbiblestudy.com. Now their program is broadcast live every Thursday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time from the College View Church of Christ, the meeting place there in Columbia, Tennessee. And they have been very, very helpful to us in their comments and questions in the chat room. And as time permits, we try to join in with their studies as well. Last week, though, we were talking about the question, what does the Bible say regarding a Christian and alcohol? And Jacob sent me, I don't think so much of a question, but it was a set of passages that really talk about the idea of being sober. And that aspect of this study was not in the lesson that I put together. I didn't really delve into that. Dale did comment, I believe, about the importance of us remaining sober. And so Jacob sent in, was wanting to know what I thought, if this would be a valid argument to basically say the Bible commands total abstinence, in part because of 4 different passages where it uses the word sober. Now, before we read those passages, the Greek word that we'll see in there is nepho. And both Vines and Strong's, in part of the definition, essentially renders it to be free from the influence of intoxicants, to be free from the influence, as we would call it, of alcohol. Okay. Now, both definitions also suggest the word can be used figuratively. And before we read this passage, I do want to say, before we go any further, that it is my belief that as Christians that we must abstain from drinking alcoholic beverages. You know, I don't have an issue with medicines as long as it's taken for medicinal purposes. You don't have to go buy the wine, you don't have to go buy the whiskey. You buy the little bottle of NyQuil that has 10% alcohol in it. I mean, that's just a completely different setting than the one who would go buy the whiskey and the wine, etc. But with that being said, someone may feel differently, and so they would, of course, have to follow their belief on that, you know. And you can get well without taking NyQuil. I've not taken it in years, and I do fine, you know, so maybe I'm a little bit more sober. But anyway, but these are very good passages, and I like to look at them. We'll have Jimmy bring them up on the screen for us there. But the first one is in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 6 through 8. And here the Apostle Paul, and this comes from the King James translation, "Ye are all the children of light, the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. Therefore let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober." There's the Greek word nepho. For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. But let us who are of the day be sober, Nepho, putting on the breastplate of faith and love. Now, in the context of this, I think the word Nepho is more figuratively used. He does identify the difference between children of the day and children of the darkness. The children of the darkness do two things. They sleep, and in this case in point, they are drunk. Okay. Now, he could be referring to literal drunkenness and therefore drawing a definite literal application of it. But the fact that he uses both sleep and drunken to describe their state would suggest that the opposite of that would be to awake, to be alert, to be sober. But, and I will say this, that if a Christian believes that he can occasionally drink wine, the effect of wine is going to hinder his ability to watch. There's, it just goes without saying there. 1 Peter 1, verse 13. Let's look at that one. He says, wherefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, there's the word Nepho, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Again, I think it's the same idea of a figurative usage of the word Nepho there, but it's still the same thing we come back to. Alcohol is going to hinder the Christian from having the proper mindset with which he is to stand firm and gird up the loins of his mind. 1 Peter 4:7, Peter says, but the end of all things is at hand, be ye therefore sober, Nepho, and watch unto prayer. Again, I think that overlaps a little bit with chapter 1, verse 13, in the usage of it. And the last one is 1 Peter 5:8, be sober, Nepho, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. And I didn't quite give Jimmy time to get caught up with us on that one, but he did. Be sober, be vigilant. The reason is the devil goes about. Now, again, I think the usage of the term is more figurative than literal. Okay. However, with that being said, I do agree with his question that he writes on here. If we had a literal roaring lion in the room, how many drinks would a Christian think would be okay in this situation? Would anyone think they should have a glass of wine with their dinner to take the edge off if they were in the room with a lion? And I think it's a very good point. The effects of alcohol has been proven, and as we showed last week, especially look at some of the passages in Proverbs, they fully understood the effects of alcohol. And I doubt that, I believe that there were Christians during the first century who read these writings who were being influenced by idolistic practices, and I have no doubt that there was the temptation there to drink, to partake in that. And so I think it is a valid argument to say that the concept of us remaining sober-minded, not limited to literal soberness, but also figurative, would rule out alcohol within the life of a Christian. Anyway, that's my thoughts, gentlemen.
I think there's a couple of other scriptures we can look at as well. If you go to 1 Timothy chapter 3, obviously talking about the qualifications to be an elder, it says not given to wine. This is the King James Version. But then you look at the qualifications for a deacon, and it says not given to much wine. However, if you go over to Leviticus, the 10th chapter, and verse 9, and of course it's talking about the priesthood, obviously, Nadab and Abihu. But if you look at verse 9, it says, do not drink wine nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons, this is speaking to Aaron, I should say, thou nor thy sons with thee, when ye go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest ye die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations. So first off, we know that God specifically said, do not drink wine.
Right.
Now secondly, if we go to Luke, the first chapter, and we look at verse 15, and this is talking about the conception of John the Baptist, but he says, for he shall be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink, and he shall be filled with the Holy Ghost even from his mother's womb. So God obviously had a reason that we should not drink wine. And so people will try to twist scriptures and look at scriptures like Paul telling Timothy to take a little wine for thy stomach's sake, and we look at the deacons here not given to much wine, and we try to justify what we're doing. But if we look at what God said in the old law, and we look at what God said about John the Baptist, if it's good enough for those folks, it should be good enough for us, and it should be very plain that wine should not be consumed, nor any alcoholic beverage.
That's right. And just because he tells one group not to doesn't automatically mean that everybody who's not a priest could.
That's right.
And just because he tells the elders don't be given to, and the deacons don't be given much to, doesn't mean he's telling, okay, all the other Christians, if you're not an elder or deacon, then you're in good shape to drink wine. You know, as we've talked about before, of all the qualifications given for the man who would serve as an elder, with the exception of being the husband of one wife and having your children in subjection, these qualifications fit to all Christians. And if you are married with children, you should have your kids in subjection. And if you are married, you should be the husband of one wife. So, I mean, that's, you know, they are attributes of faithful Christians, not of exceptional men that doesn't apply to regular Christians. And I think this would be applicable there, what you're talking about. John?
Yeah, I agree. The question, I guess, that was put forth, was this sufficient enough an argument to become completely an argument for remaining abstinent from drinking strong drink? Right?
I don't know if his question was, is this sufficient by itself? But would this be a valid argument to be used in that? Right. Yeah.
And I agree with what you said. I think it is a valid argument in the idea of remaining sober as Christians.
Yeah.
To be spiritually sober, to be awake, to be aware, to walk circumspect, all those things. If we are under the influence of alcohol or any intoxicant, then it pretty much makes that nearly impossible.
Exactly.
To ensure that we're going to be aware, that we're going to be awake, that we're not going to be falling to the devil and other temptations that he puts before us.
Well, Daniel makes a point in the chat room. He says also use the sober-minded scriptures on the topic of substance and drugs, not limited to alcohol.
Right.
Anything that would hinder, and I would even throw this out, that not only alcohol and drugs, but anything that would lead us away could, in a figurative way, become an intoxicant within our life. It could be the love for a woman. It could be the love for a job. It could be a lust after this, after that. And if we allow ourselves to partake of that, then it can remove the sober-mindedness that we would have, you know.
Right. You know, I'm sure I don't want to rehash the whole lesson of last week, but just a couple of verses that I noticed initially here. In Proverbs, we have some wise sayings to follow there in the book of Proverbs. And 20 verse 1, he says, wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise.
That's right.
You know, and it doesn't classify strong drink or wine for some as a mocker, for some might be a brawler, but for others it's okay.
Yeah.
If it doesn't bother you, it's okay.
Someone may say, well, I'm not led astray by it, so I must be wise. No, the wise one is the one who doesn't partake of it. Yeah.
And then in chapter 23 of Proverbs, in verse 29, it says, who has woe, who has sorrow, who has contentions, who has complaints, who has wounds without cause, who has redness of eyes. All these things that obviously we wouldn't want to have.
Right.
Well, who has all these things? Those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine.
Exactly.
I mean, it's obvious throughout the Scriptures, and many, many other passages, I'm sure you covered many of them last week as well, that only negative things are associated with wine and alcoholic drinks. I've never found a positive thing associated with drinking alcohol. Like you mentioned, of course, Paul tells Timothy, you know, to take a little wine for your stomach's sake. And there could be various arguments made in that case. Was wine intoxicant wine? A lot of times in the New Testament, wine is simply used as for grape juice.
The must,
right?
The word there.
And then on the other side is, like you mentioned there, for medicinal purposes. Yeah. You wouldn't want to abuse any medicine out there. Exactly. Any painkiller, you wouldn't want to go and just pop a painkiller every day. That would be just as wrong as drinking intoxicating drinks.
Exactly.
But if you need the painkiller after a surgery or something along those lines, then it's medicine, and it's okay to use that.
Yeah. And I think we can use these verses on sober-mindedness as we're about to, in a similar fashion as as we look at the first portion of our lesson on apparel, what we're going to be looking at is Bible principles that say nothing about apparel, but the principles in and of themselves will help to govern our apparel. Same thing here. These verses, even if they're not literally referring to being without alcohol, the passage in and of themselves demand a standard that would prohibit alcohol within the life of a Christian, you know, without a thought. Dale, any other thoughts?
Nope.
Okay. All right, Jacob, I appreciate that, and I'm going to go in and file that and put that in my alcoholic sermon, or sermon on alcohol material. Well, let's go ahead and take our first break for the evening. And Jimmy says, you didn't warn me about that. So I will talk for just a minute unless you're ready to go. When we come back, we're going to start the lesson. I want to do a clean start with this. On what does the Bible say about a Christian's apparel? Being raised within the church, I have known many Christians, and I've known varying views on this subject. And what we're going to try to do is do our best to look at it from the Bible. What does the Bible have to say? So stay tuned. On the other side of the break, we will begin this lesson. We'll be right back.
I'm Ron Witt, one of the elders of the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ. On behalf of the elders and members of the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ, I would like to invite you to be our guest at any of our worship services and Bible classes. The meeting place of the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ is located at 16300 North May Avenue, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, zip code 73013. The Seminole Pointe Church of Christ meets Sunday mornings at 9:30 for Bible classes, 10:30 for worship service, and 5 p.m. for our afternoon worship service. We also have Bible classes on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Whether you live in Oklahoma City area or you are traveling through Oklahoma City, we would love to have you come and be our guest. We have Bible classes for all ages. At the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ, our focus is to teach only the Word of God. Rest assured that when you visit with us, you will find that we will appeal only to God's precious Word. Now, let us return to our study.
Alrighty, let's start with the study of what does the Bible say about a Christian's apparel. Now remember, we need your participation. Never assume that we know everything, because we don't. And while the three of us enjoy sitting down and studying our Bibles together, it is so much better of a study when you can join us. And so if you choose simply to listen, that's perfectly fine. But if you'd like to give us your comments and questions, please use the chat room. You can click on the guest button and type in a name and hit enter, and it'll register in the room. I've not had any luck with the Facebook button. So if you just want to use the guest, because if I've used the Facebook button before, and it'll tell me too many requests attempted and it cannot work at this time, and I have to actually close the browser and open up a whole other program in order to get it to work properly. So use the guest button, and don't hesitate at any point. Say, I've got a question, or just type your comment in. We will, John monitors it, I monitor it as well, and we will bring it into our discussion. Now, when I was probably in kindergarten, maybe first grade, when my mother and father became Christians. And when my mother was taken to be baptized, she had been studied, one of her good friends and husband had studied with my mother. And then they brought in David Tanner, a preacher there in the Atlanta area, to teach my mom. So they'd had studies. And my mom decided that she was ready to become a Christian. And when, now, like, bear in mind, this was probably 69, maybe 70, 1970 or so. When she went down to the building, she wore short shorts, because that was the thing and that's what she wore. And after she passed away at the age of 58 years old, David had written a kind of an article about her and had commented that that was the last time she ever wore anything like that. You know, because she became a Christian, she was taught the truth, and in repenting from the former way, you turn away from those things. But I have known Christians who would say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. I've known some Christians who believe that you must be covered from the neck down to the ankle. One time, this preacher years ago, he and his son were going swimming at someone's house. Nobody was there. It's just the two of them. And I happened to stop by to drop something off. And they were both wearing, if I remember correctly, long sleeve button-up shirts and long-legged jeans, because he felt like anything less would be immodest. And that's what his position was. But as I said, I've known some who, you know, a man can go without a shirt in public. Some say that a woman can wear short shorts or wear some sort of bikini top. You know, you have different views regarding this among Christians. And I think the reason why we have so many different views is because the world is so prevalent. Dale, if we could go back to when you were born in the early 20s, well, you weren't around then, were you?
No, I was born in 1947, so
47.
don't make me too old.
Okay. If we were to go back to the 20s, what some of our good Christian ladies are wearing today would be thought risque, you know. And so our culture has slacked through the years, and I think what has happened is it has crossed into an area where it influences Christians to wear those things which are contrary to Bible doctrine, to Bible principles. And so that's what we're going to talk about this evening. Dale, any thoughts or comments before we begin?
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said, but it's not just our culture has changed, our attitude has changed.
That's a good point.
When you think about it, people are getting more and more lax in the way they approach God. And yet God expects us to bring our best before Him. If you go all the way back to Genesis, the 3rd chapter, in verse 7, when Adam and Eve had committed that sin of eating the forbidden fruit, and they recognized that they were naked, they sewed fig leaves together. Now, there's nothing to suggest that they were very minimally dressed. We have to assume that they probably pretty well covered themselves up pretty good. But yet that was not satisfactory to God, because if you go down to the 21st verse of chapter 3, it says that also for Adam and his wife the Lord God made tunics of skin and clothed them. So the fig leaves were not sufficient. God expected more of them. We look at Exodus, the 19th chapter, and we look at verses 9 through 11. It says, "And the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever." So Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. Verse 10 says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes." Verse 11, "And let them be ready for the 3rd day, for on the 3rd day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people." You see that word consecrate, or some versions use the word sanctify them. Concentrate them or sanctify them. According to the testimony of the Jews, bathing and washing clothes always went together, because it was necessary that as they were about to appear in the presence of God, everything should be clean and everything should be pure about them, that they might be admonished by this of the necessity of inward purity. And while it is true that God looks on the inward man as far as our service to Him, our faith to Him, our love for Him, the outward washing was the emblem. And oftentimes our outward appearance dictates what is really on the inside of us as far as our relationship with God. In Deuteronomy, the 22nd chapter, verse 5, He said, "A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment. For all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God." And yet today we see men wearing earrings, we see men wearing long hair, we see women cutting their hair so short that if you didn't look at them from the front, you would think that they were a man. Plus the fact they wear Levi's that look just like a man's, because they are men's Levi's. There's a poem that says, "My appearance" is the title of it, and it goes like this. It says, "I go to see a girlfriend, my clothes are nice and neat. I comb the hair on my head and shine the shoes on my feet. My best friend is getting married. He asked me to be the best man. I want to make his wedding great, so I dress the best I can. I'll attend a funeral tomorrow. I will look my very best. A brand new shirt and tie, plus a new suit and vest. Now it's Sunday morning. I will worship God today. My clothes won't be too tidy and my hair in disarray. My shirt will be open to show the hair on my chest. And I'm not really too concerned whether or not my pants are pressed. Why is it when before mere men I want to look my best, but when I come to worship God, I don't care how I'm dressed?" You know, if we went to see the President of the United States, if he invited us to come up, we'd dress the best we could. If we went to see the Queen of England, we'd dress the best we could. But yet when we come before the throne of God, we have this attitude that it really doesn't matter, but it's our inward that really matters. And so this is why we need to look at what the Scriptures say, not just the New Testament, but we go all the way back to the Old Testament, and we know that God does care how we approach the throne.
Okay. John, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree. I had a couple thoughts real quick. Guest 501 from Ireland in the chat room.
Okay.
Oh, welcome.
That's Angela.
Angela. She was with us last week as well.
Mentions 2 Corinthians 5, verse 20, discussing we are to be ambassadors for Christ. And she says, "So we as Christians need to be attired in such a way that we are Christ's representatives among the people of the world around us. Which I think is a good point. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that in a roundabout way later, about our impact on others with our dress.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when we look at Matthew chapter 18. But that's a good point. And Rosalito points out, appearance of my name may edify somebody even if I could not hear any sound.
Translation, he's not getting our sound right now.
I gotcha.
The sound is there, but in a little bit we'll take it when we take our next break. I'm going to check something on the audio-only stream that might be causing the issue. I'm not positive. It is working, but he's all the way in the Philippines, and they've had trouble before.
Yeah.
The only comment I've got about what Dale read, now don't fire me.
I would never do that, John.
In the case in point of Adam and Eve, just very specifically about that one, I've heard preachers, and I've used it years ago. I've used when I was younger. God looked at Adam and Eve in their fig leaf clothing, something about like a bikini, and said, they're immodest, I'm going to clothe them. Well, he very well could have done that. But the only problem, it was just Adam and Eve. There was nobody else around. I really think the making of the coats of skin was for later, when they left the garden. Because a few minutes earlier they were naked. Okay? Well, nakedness is not a sin if it's between the husband and the wife. And I've heard some brothers try to put forth that, they were sinning while naked, but since they didn't know it was a sin, then they weren't guilty of it. No, if it was wrong before, then it would have been, if it was wrong afterwards, it would have been wrong before. So when he made them coats of skin, it wasn't to hide their nakedness from themselves. I really think it was preparatory because he knew he was about to cast them out of the garden, and they would need to be fully clothed.
Well, but
because they didn't even have children at that point.
That's true, and that's exactly the point. If that argument is going to be made, when they were chased out or sent out of the garden and everything, there was still just Adam and Eve.
Exactly.
And nothing was said about they were immodestly dressed with the fig leaves.
Right, we have to assume or make a reasonable assumption.
Exactly right. Yeah. And my only point about it is God does care how we're dressed, or he wouldn't have taken the time to
that's a very good point.
Put clothes on them.
Yeah, fig leaves will work. They don't hold up in the wash. Well, I guess they would because of the rain and everything.
We don't know.
Anyway.
I don't plan on dressing with fig leaves myself.
But I think the point you made is a very good point. We are to focus on what we wear, whether it be when we're in public at the store, or we're going to worship God, or we're on vacation in Timbuktu. We have to keep mind of the situation and how we're dressed. If we're going to worship service, then we take God our best. Why should he accept any less than that? But if we're going to go out to the beach, okay, go out something comfortable, but yet be conscientious of it and not sin. And that's what we're looking at, exactly.
Yeah, I wanted to agree with Dale on that as well, about it being more than just a social change in the way people dress. And I think I want to just point out, and I think we'll get into this a little bit in our lesson, is that in a lot of cases I think we're just deceiving ourselves when we look at these things and we try to justify them, and we try to say, well, it's just a cultural change now. It's just the way we dress. And you go over to England or somewhere, and you go to a beach over there maybe, and they're not wearing much at all. On the top, they might even have a top on.
So you've heard.
For women, right. I've never been to England on the beaches, but that's what I hear.
Don't have to go to England. You can go to Florida.
Well, I didn't see that beach in Florida, but
I did.
But I know for sure over in England it's an acceptable thing.
Accidental deal.
So I hear anyway. And it may not be England, it may be a different country over there. And we think of it, and I think we still deceive ourselves when we say, well, it's just a cultural thing. It's okay over there because it's just their culture.
If I'm over there, I can go topless on the beach.
Right. It's just as wrong over there as it is over here. Just because their culture has accepted it has not made it any more right.
And it's part of the fitting in. I would suggest what we're talking about, being sober-minded, is partly affected by that. Mm-hmm. We begin to think like the world, and it affects the way that we think because we want to be like them. I know J.A. Gordon put up a comment that there are some people that think anything is okay, so long as it covers more than what the world considers okay. Such as if the world says it's okay to wear bikini, then it's okay for Christians to wear the super short shorts because it covers more than the bikini. And some would use that argumentation there. She makes a good point with that. Christians will say, well, as long as I'm not like them, then I'm going to be okay.
Well, along with that comment and everything, when we lived in St. Louis, We knew of a youth minister there at one of the liberal congregations, specifically in one of his sermons, said that he did not care if the young ladies came to service in bikinis as long as they came. And that's kind of the trend that is taking place now. Not all young preachers, but more and more young preachers and even some older preachers are begin to cater more to the young people, and they think that if they allow and encourage the young people to dress casually when they come to worship service, that more of them will come.
Yeah. When we were out in South Carolina, I came across a church called the Barefoot Church. That's what it was called, the Barefoot Church.
Yeah, let me hit Daniel's here. I didn't
Yeah,
realize
go
I
ahead.
missed a couple there up top. I slipped by those. They ran by. Because this is one that I was going to actually mention tonight at some part of our lesson.
Yeah, at some point we'll get actually into the lesson.
Yeah.
So go ahead there.
But he mentioned that it baffles him that even some Christians believe modesty is situational. Talking about activities like swimming, sports, working out, etc. Those don't make immodest apparel modest. And that was the point I was going to bring up. Alan and I were down in Ada for a tennis tournament that he was at today. Mm-hmm. And the girls and the guys that are playing tennis are usually fully dressed. I mean, they got short, some of them have collared shirts on and full-length shorts. But for some reason, the girls have to be in like a tank top and like short shorts or a tiny little skirt type thing covering that. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, I'm not sure why that is.
It's like girls volleyball. Hey, as long as it's a sport, it's fine.
Yeah.
Think about cheerleaders. Even flag team. All right, I've seen some flag team that the outfits were incredibly tight and immodest, but because it was sport related, then it's okay.
Right.
And that's the situational ethics he's talking about there. Yeah. Go ahead. Any other thoughts you want to bring in?
Joe Glatz had mentioned the outside is a representation of the inside, as we were discussing earlier.
Yeah.
Ungodly dress reflects ungodly insides or desires. And guest 231 said we should also look at the purpose of wearing garments unsuitable to God. The people of the me generation are thinking of what the world thinks of them and how they are accepted. We should be instilling in our children the worth of God and what He thinks of us, not the world.
Okay, that's right.
That's a good point.
That's right. Sarah says there's something to be said about encouraging the young. Did you just read that?
Nope, go ahead. I was about to.
Something to be said about encouraging the young people. However, permissiveness is not encouraging in any way. So, I tell you what we need to do. We've got several other comments, but I want to step into the lesson for a couple points, and then we'll back up. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take our next break, and we'll see if we can figure out what's happening in the Philippines with the audio feed real quick. And on the other side of the break, we will look at what the Bible says about a Christian's apparel, really beginning with the fact that our conduct is to be holy. And we'll show that. So stay tuned. We will be right back.
Hi, I'm Rhonda. I'm a member of the Seminole Pointe Church of Christ in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The Seminole Pointe Church of Christ has outstanding Bible classes for all ages. We have teachers who are dedicated to teaching God's Word in insightful and energetic ways. Please come visit us and bring your children. They will love our Bible classes, and you will be benefited.
Hello, my name is Dale Decker. I am one of 4 elders here at Seminole Pointe Church of Christ. We are very fortunate to have a Bible-loving group of Christians here at Seminole. Our Bible class teachers are second to none. We have Bible classes for all age groups. Our goal is heaven, and we make every effort to ensure that the Word of God is taught at every age group. We hope that you will come and check us out. You will find that we are a very friendly and loving congregation. We are located at 16,300 May Avenue in Oklahoma City. And now back to our study.
I think we've got the audio problem somewhat solved. Let me tell Rosalito to try it again and see if this is working. John or Dale, let's go ahead and start with, we mentioned before going into the break that we have to be holy in conduct. Why do we say that?
Well, obviously we have to be holy in conduct because oftentimes the only Bible people might read would be us as individuals, by our example, by our words. Appearance is part of that. When I was in the military, we started getting more and more women And the tendency was for women to try to get their military uniforms where those skirts got pretty short. So we literally had the women get down on their knees, and we would measure it with a yardstick or a ruler, and if it was more than 1 inch above the knees, they went to the barracks and they lowered those skirts, because of the fact that you want people to be modestly dressed. You want people to be dressed in such a way that it would not cause someone to lust after them.
Well, I've seen warnings and pictures of illustrations. If you're going to go visit a prison and you're a woman, there is a dress code.
Exactly
things you
right.
cannot wear when you're going to go into a male prison. But read for us 1 Peter 1, 14 through 16 there.
Peter says, as obedient children, not conforming yourselves to the former lust as in your ignorance. Verse 15, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. American Standard Translation says, in all your manner of living.
Yeah.
And I like that wording a little bit better. Verse
Absolutely.
16 says, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy.
That's right. He tells us to be holy. We are his children through the spirit of adoption. Our Father is holy, therefore we should be holy. It is we who have been called out of the world of darkness into his marvelous light. I believe it's Peter that goes on to say that. Mm-hmm. And as a result, we are to be living as a holy nation. And I'm going to have John read 1 Peter 2, 9 through 12 here in just a second. Bear in mind, when he talks about a holy nation, he's not talking about America. He's talking about Christians, those who make up the body of Christ, the kingdom of heaven over which Christ is reigning. But John, what does this passage say about us?
Well, 1 Peter chapter 2 there, starting in verse 9, Peter says, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation.
Now, and this kind of goes back to what Dale was talking about too. We want people to look at us and ultimately glorify God, not because they see some great person standing in front of them, but because they see a standard, a holy standard, one who is a person of God or of the people of God, and as a result, a holy nation. And if we're wearing something that causes someone to lust after us, if we're wearing something in public that is immodest, it's going to hinder our effectiveness as a member of the holy nation, member of that body of Christ. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Guest 501 earlier talked about our conscience being a guide. And I think this is a good part to bring that up, because if we are trying to be holy and that's our purpose, then I think we can better rely on our conscience.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, too many times today, the world's conscience is seared, and their conscience would tell them to do whatever they want. But as a Christian who's striving to follow Christ, I think that's a good thing to look at. Here he says, our conscience will always guide us in the right. We can either choose to heed it or not, and we must accept the consequences that go along with it. However, the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, so we must keep that to the forefront of our minds when we are out and about. The eyes of the mind can be easily blinded.
That's right.
So I think that's a good point. I mean, our conscience should be a very good guide for us.
Yeah.
But only if we allow it to work as it should.
That's right.
And that's a big key to the conscience, I think, here.
And that's what Christians do. We train our consciences by God's word.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why even Paul, kind of a separate subject, if there's something which we think to be wrong, even though it's not, if we think it is wrong, then we should not do it.
Right.
It's a violation of our conscience. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let's see. Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. Think about this for a moment. The Apostle Paul says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not, pardon me, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now, we're told here that we are to present our bodies as a living sacrifice, something that is holy, set apart, acceptable unto God. Pardon me a minute.
And I think a good key on this one, Romans 12 there in verse 2, where he talks about do not be conformed to this world, I think is a good spot to lean on as well. Because that's what typically seems to be going on with people who try to justify what they wear because of the culture.
Right.
And that's them being conformed to the world. And they look at the culture and this is the way people dress now. It must be okay. And that basically is just evident of those who are allowing themselves to be conformed to the world.
That's right.
In fact, the American Standard Translation uses the word fashioned according to this world.
I heard a preacher years ago, and I used the same illustration because I think it fits so well. It tells us, do not be conformed to the world. Think of a gecko. Does the gecko lizard change its color?
Mm-hmm.
The gecko
Chameleon.
lizard.
Chameleon,
not the gecko. Sorry. He sells insurance. Anyway, the chameleon lizard, if it crawls over something that's somewhat green, its pigmentation will alter to that color. Something brown, same thing. That's a conforming process. But think about a caterpillar now, spinning the cocoon and coming out a butterfly. That's not a conformation, that's a transformation. That completely changes the very look of that insect. Well, he tells us not to be conformed to the world. And I think when we try to dress like the world, whether it be in style or what have you, it is our goal to conform to the world, we're wrong. We instead must be living above the standards of the world. We must be transformed, as he says there. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts?
Well, I agree with you. In fact, if we look like the rest of the world, how is people going to know that Christ lives in us? Through our words and our actions.
That's right. And understand, when we're talking about something that's not wrong, there's no problem. We're talking about we stand out on those areas that are contrary to God's will. That's where our light shines more than anything.
And that's a big struggle, I think, for Christians. And that's the big concern, I think, that we all should have, is that too often it seems like Christians don't want to be known, don't want to stand out. They don't want for people to look at them and go, you're different. You're not like us. They want to fit in. They want to be like everybody else. They want to have as many friends. They don't want to have people. They want to be the outcast.
That's right.
We need to be ready to stand up and be the outcast if that's what it takes to be a Christian.
Sarah clarified. I said flag team a while ago. Color guard's another reference to that. Many sport activities that call for immodesty dress that Christians will justify because they want to do that. Dale, how about Philippians chapter 1 and 27? There's something in there that would affect the way we dress, isn't there?
Yes, Paul told the church of Philippi, says, only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel.
Yeah, let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ. Yes, that pertains to what we talk about, what we think, and yes, even what we wear when we are out in public in the presence of others. And that's what we're stressing. We're not talking about what type of PJs to buy yourself, unless you're going to wear those PJs to Walmart, which I've seen people do before. We're not talking about you in the privacy of your own home. We're talking about you when you're out in public around people, other people. That's what we're looking at here with this.
Well, in fact, the King James Version uses the word conversation. The American Standard Translation uses the word manner of life.
And hence the New King James says conduct.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right, the manner of one's life. John, what does Paul tell Timothy?
Tells Timothy there in 1 Timothy chapter 4 in verse 12, let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word and conduct, in love and spirit and faith and purity.
That's a good point. Exactly. Be an example to those who are around. James 3:13, we'll look at this real quick, and we've got two verses, and then I noticed we've got a good question in the chat room we'll look at here. James says, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. Good conduct. It even affects the way that we dress. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, I threw this in there. As from the standpoint that we as parents, we have responsibility in what we teach our children. What do we show our children? Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. There was I think it's a Tide commercial a couple years back. It really bothered me. Because what happened is the teenage daughter had this white skirt that was probably this long, okay? And the father saw it hanging up on the clothesline with all the other clothes. Well, he knocked it off and got it all muddy and threw it in the dirty clothes. Well, she comes in, pulls it out, and is just distraught. The mother to the rescue. And the commercial ends with the girl sashaying out the door in that little bitty white skirt and the father being upset about it. What type of example does that set? So anyway, any thoughts?
Well, Shane in the chat room earlier, I think this goes well with Philippians, where we read about being worthy of the gospel of Christ. He talked about here and we talked about bringing our best to God in other lessons. In Exodus 22:29 says, "You shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me." And he says God has always wanted the best we could offer. If we are always comparing ourselves to the worst possible standard, we limit ourselves. And we see the standard here is the gospel of Christ. And we're to live worthy of that. We're to have a conduct worthy of the gospel of Christ. We're to be set apart for God, for Christ. And so I think our apparel is a big standard that we can look at for that. And then before we get to the question there, he mentioned something a little bit later here in 1 Peter 3, verse 4, I thought was good to go with. He said, "But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart." And we're going to talk about a verse later on that has an impact on this as well, about the adorning of women. But he says, let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. So what's most important when it comes to the adornment? Is it this physical stuff that we put on and all the pretty things that women might try to, to maybe go a little bit overboard to make themselves appealing when they go out in public? Is it taking off a lot of clothes to become appealing in public? What do we need to concentrate with the adorning? And it's that spiritual adornment.
And even James kind of rebuked the brethren there for showing preference over a man who is wealthily dressed and showing disrespect to the man who is poorly dressed. Right. And along that, we got a couple of questions we want to bring in here. But Travis Jackson Nash, I think they're probably related to the other one, Shane Marshall Nash, says it's important to remember that God judges us by what's inside and not as much by our outward appearance. So it's even more important to keep our hearts and minds modest as Christians. Outstanding point there. Modest mind, a sober mind will yield a modest and sober Christian.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because you can follow all the commands you want to be modestly dressed, but if your inside is of dead man's bones, it's done you no good.
Exactly. Jesus called the hypocrites of the Pharisees white bones in a whitewashed tomb. But if your inward man is what it ought to be, inward man and inward woman is what it ought to be, the outward will automatically be what it needs to be. It will follow. And we're not talking over Dale. I just realized we've probably gone 3 or 4 minutes and he's sitting there nice and quiet.
That's all right. I just want to make sure we understand this word modest, though. And we'll see some scriptures a little bit later too, but just to emphasize at this point, what God is saying to us is that we should not dress in such a way that we draw attention to ourselves, and yet the American people do that all the time. We see that on Easter Sunday. People are wearing their nicest dresses, their bonnets and stuff like that, stuff they normally would not wear any other Sunday. We see that also on Christmas time as well. People are trying to draw attention to themselves. We see that with the type of jewelry we wear. We also see that with the tight clothing that we wear. The low-cut blouses or low-cut dresses, they're wearing these to draw attention to themselves. What God is saying, do not wear clothing that's going to draw attention to yourself, but bring your best forward. And as was mentioned, our inward man, if we truly have that love for God, then it's going to show in the outward appearance as well.
But I think what you're talking about, though, is more of the intent of the person. The reason why I say that, I've seen some preachers who dress just as best as they possibly could. And if they're dressing for show, then they're just as wrong as the person who brings in their ultra best on quote-unquote Easter Sunday and quote-unquote Christmas Day. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's what I was saying there, is if you dress in such a way that you're drawing attention to yourself, that's not modest apparel.
If that's your intent. Because
Dale, if you go into Walmart with that suit on, or to the Dollar General, you are going to draw attention to yourself.
I hope so.
But it's in a good way. You're not dressing with the purpose of having people look at you and be amazed and awed with what you wear or what you're not wearing.
Well, let me tell you about here. The elders have a standing rule for the elders as well as the preacher. Okay, Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. And if we had Gene on camera, I'd point at him, because we have a guest with us sitting in here tonight, Gene McPherson, and he served as an elder for a number of years. And the rule of thumb is you always wear a coat and tie. Now I say he's talking about the elders as well as the preacher. And so as a result, come Sunday, I'll always wear a suit on Sunday. And the elders will dress up as well. But we're not dressing up to be seen by everybody and be patted everybody on the back. If I went to the Philippines, I've had several preachers tell me, if you go to the Philippines, you don't wear a suit when you're preaching, just because of how hot it is, So it's possible when we bring our best, if our intention is for show, then we're wrong. But if it's our intention to bring our best because we're coming to worship God and He deserves our best, then everybody has different, like I don't have any shirts that have couplings. I'd have to get a knife and poke a hole if I wanted to wear a coupling in one of my shirts there. But I know several preachers that all the shirts they wear are shirts that have couplings. So different, things that I don't have, and if I did, I guess I would wear. But anyway, there is a question I want to kind of jump into here real quick. And I think it's a really good question. It kind of deals with some of the stuff that we've kind of talked about over the last 2 or 3 years here. But I think, though, we have to take it at face value. This is guest number 501. It says, I'm curious, should a Church of Christ have a dress code and penalize members if they don't comply? Now, before we answer that, guest 231 says, when we serve God and represent Christ, do people see Christ through us? When they look upon us, we are the ambassadors. And then, in response to that, guest 712 says God has a dress code. It is up to all Christians to obey His commands on what we choose to wear. God does care about what we wear. Okay. So, should a local church establish a dress code that they use to penalize the members? And I would have to say that answer would be no, as far as the penalizing members. Now, here at Seminole Pointe, we strongly encourage our young men, our men in general, who are going to wait publicly, to at least wear a tie. Well, that's a shirt, tie, pants, and all that. But to wear a tie, to wear a jacket, encourage them to bring their best before God. Now, it may be possible that we have a member here who doesn't have a sports jacket, but they do have a tie. And since we've really been working on this since 2010, when we preached the 3-part series, I've kind of looked at some of the men waiting on the table, and I would say most Sundays, at least 3/4 of those 8 men that are up there either have on a coat and tie or a tie. However, the elders will not walk up to one of the men who is not wearing a tie and say, well, you got to go sit down, you don't have a tie on. Now, if a man walks up there to wait and he's got some blue jeans and a t-shirt and he's got some logo on the t-shirt, the elders will probably say, next Sunday, bring your best to God, and then we'll put you up there. But it's not the same thing as the question is posing. We don't penalize our members because they violate the dress code. Now, what's your thought on that as one of the elders?
Well, I guess the question is, what exactly do you mean by penalize? If you're talking about church discipline and withdrawing from an individual because they're not dressing appropriately, I think as a responsibility we have to know what the circumstances are with that individual.
Right.
For example, we have one individual in the congregation that has never worn anything but a shirt and Levi's. And we joke with the individual that probably his pajamas are Levi's as well.
Yeah, right.
He goes to weddings, he goes to funerals, and he's still wearing the same outfit.
Nice shirt, pair of Levi's, yeah.
And that's probably the best he has.
Yeah.
He doesn't own a suit, he doesn't own a tie.
Right.
Could he afford to go out and get one? Possibly. Are we going to force him to go out and get one? No,
right.
We're not. That's not the purpose of it. We do encourage, as you mentioned, our men who get up and serve publicly to dress nice. We'd like them to wear a coat, but we're not going to refuse to allow them to get up and lead a prayer, or
Right.
to serve on the Lord's table, or to even lead singing if they're not wearing a coat. We do ask our song leaders to wear at least a tie. And the reason we do this is because we do broadcast our services over the internet.
Yeah.
And the people who observe our services over the internet may not be a Christian. And we want to put our best foot forward. We want people to know that we do, in fact, love God enough that we are going to respect Him by dressing modestly and putting our best foot forward.
That's right. Well, the men that preach the last Sunday night of each month, we do request of them to wear a coat and tie.
Exactly right. Yeah, I know preachers. When I was in a congregation in St. Louis, the preacher there never wore a coat and tie. He said he never would. And I know of a preacher that I don't think he's preaching in Lubbock now, but he was. He never wears a coat and tie either. I have a problem with that myself. But you know, that's between them and God. At least I will say this: they do wear nice slacks, and they do wear a nice clean shirt, and it's not wrinkled or anything. When I worked for a pharmaceutical company, I had a representative I hired, and I worked with him one day, and he was an overweight individual, and it was a hot day.
Yeah.
And he got out of the car without his coat. I didn't say anything. But we got back in the car. Of course, I put my coat on. I was dressed up in a suit and tie. And we go into the doctor's office and call on the doctor, and we come back out, and he says, "What's your opinion of this?" I says, "Have you looked at yourself in a mirror?" He says, "No." And I said, "Well, you go look at yourself in a mirror." His shirt was all wrinkled and everything from it being hot. And I said, "Imagine now what that doctor saw when you went in there. Now, if you wore a coat over that, they would not have seen that. They would have seen a nice coat and a tie.
Yeah.
And you would have put your best foot forward." From that point on, he wore a coat and tie. And the point is that we dress nice because we're putting forth the best that we have, and it's that inward man that determines our outward appearance.
Yeah. I will say, and this comes from a question in the chat room, the gentleman you used earlier as an example with the Levi's and nice shirt, he does lead prayer.
Absolutely.
And he does wait on the Lord's table.
Absolutely.
You know, so he does participate.
Absolutely.
We'll make sure we, you know.
Now, I'm glad you
yeah.
mentioned that, because I didn't mean to say that we don't
And-
utilize him.
And we're not trying to say that we prefer people to bring their best so that they can look pleasing to other people. But there is a manner wherein that we are representative of Christians, and when we come together to worship God, it should be a holy and a solemn thing that we do. And we must approach it with a mindset with which God would be pleased. And our mindset oftentimes will be reflected in the way that we dress and behave. And even get there on time. We could leave the whole discussion of apparel right now, talk about getting to services on time, having your Bible lessons done, bringing your Bible, just a whole slew of things.
But we're running out of time, and we've got so much in the chat room to talk about.
I know, I looked over there. They've got a whole nother conversation going, aren't they?
Well, and we were talking about from penalizing and from discussing what someone wear. We were really focusing on how dressed up they were.
Yeah.
Let's
go ahead
Just
and bring some of them
712
in.
had a good
Yeah.
point there as well. That goes a little bit on a different avenue of that, and I think we would agree with what's said here. He says, however, if you have a brother or sister that is continuing to dress immodestly, now this is a different issue.
Exactly.
Even after being taught the truth and will not repent, then we have a responsibility to go to them and teach them.
It's a different,
different issue.
Well,
clearly.
I could give an example. Let's say someone, a young man, comes in a T-shirt, and excuse me, it has some wording on it or some picture on it that's inappropriate. We would not be good Christians if we did not talk to them. And I'm not talking about just the elders doing that. The church, Christians have a responsibility to approach anyone who is walking disorderly. And that individual may be doing that out of total ignorance. They may be a new convert and they just need some teaching. But they may be someone who is somewhat rebellious, and they need some admonishing. And that's not just the elders' responsibility, that's Christians' responsibility as a whole.
And I want to bring definitely one more point in here that I think there's so many things in here, but I wanted to at least hit one more before we stop.
Yeah.
J.A. Gordon had pointed out something that I think is very critical. And I think it's a problem in the church, out of the church, Christians, non-Christians. It doesn't seem to matter who it is. And we also need to think about when we should start teaching our children about modesty. And she points out a really good point that I see almost everywhere I go, including at church. And she says, you see these small children in the most immodest bathing suits and things, and most people think it is so cute. And that's how they look at it. But we have to realize that if we allow them to dress this way when they are younger, then it's going to confuse them when they get older.
Yeah.
Modesty doesn't change
right.
as you grow.
And what,
I guess aside from an infant, an infant one piece, okay, if you really tried to look at that, I guess it shows all their leg, but once they get...
But more's the practice.
Yeah.
The 7-year-old is not guilty of sin because they wear what their mom gives them. But if they continue that practice and listen to their mother, who is living vicariously through that now 18-year-old teenager dressing modestly, then the teenager becomes accountable for their deeds there. One point I want to bring in, and I know we're past our point. Guest 501 says, I visited congregations in the States where I was warned I had to wear skirt/dress to services or anything else would be frowned upon. This was the first time I ever heard of this. And I'll tell you what, if a Bible student's going to be honest, they will have to admit that from a strictly biblical perspective, the New Testament does not define what garb we are to wear to worship. My point is, Paul didn't have a suit. They didn't have the clothing we had today. Now, I suspect they had their better clothings. They had their inner garments, the outer garments. Remember when Peter jumped into the water, he took off his outer garment, okay? They definitely had clothing for different occasions. Now, culturally, we typically look at a skirt as being, I'm going to say a dress. A lot of skirts are too short, but, a dress and nice slacks, a nice shirt are all signified by dressing up. And as Dell pointed out before, if the president was coming and you were going to go meet him or you were going to a wedding, what would you wear? Okay. So it's not so much you have to wear a dress or you have to wear a coat and tie. It is, are you bringing your best attitude to God in worship? And if so, then you're going to be you want to do your best. And if your best is only at this point what you have, then that's it. Now, I knew a fellow years ago, he was on the way to services, and they didn't go to church at night because he got a flat tire, he got out, he got the tire changed, his hands were greasy, he stepped in mud, he went home. You know what? Go on to services. Use the bathroom to wash your hands if you can shake people's hands and go barefoot if you need to. Get on there and worship God. Don't let that stop you. But when you have a choice to make at home and you say, it's just church, I'm going to wear this, and the attitude is that, then that's when you're not bringing your best. Now, that deviates from the immodesty part of the discussion, which we'll talk more about next week, but it does reflect us as Christians bringing our best.
But along with that comment, I want to just say one final thing. Going back to Deuteronomy, the 22nd chapter, verse 5. God said, a woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment. For all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God. When I was preaching, I preached sermons on modest apparel and everything. And there are some nice pantsuits for women. As a man, I would not be caught dead wearing those pantsuits because they're feminine in nature. There's nothing wrong with a woman wearing female design pantsuits. Now, I would have a problem if the women come in wearing Levi's made for men. And if they're tight, a lot of times they'll wear them just as tight as they can.
Oh, it's not the blue jeans, it's the tightness of the jeans that call the issue.
Yeah, both. Yeah. But
yeah.
Or wearing a man's Western shirt. I've seen this on women before. So we have some folks in our congregation that are very adamant that women should wear dresses all the time. And that's fine if they want to do that. But I, as a Christian, have a hard time enforcing things upon someone else that I cannot find scriptural reference for.
Right.
And what the scriptures say is that a woman should not dress like a man and a man should not dress like a woman. And there are indeed good female design pantsuits for women.
Yeah. If we really wanted to take that discussion, I really wonder, in the case point of Deuteronomy, is if he ultimately was trying to shield them from homosexual practices that the idealistic worlds would have been engaging in. Men dressing like women.
Well, and that may be true, but the point is
You respect the sex.
Yeah, the application
Yeah.
is there for us today as well.
Exactly.
And
Okay.
then, so the final question is, we had a lesson on apparel, and we did a lot of discussion about what we should wear to church and what we should wear when we're serving the Lord. And here you have 3 guys sitting at a table, and you have 2 in a suit and tie, and one guy over here without anything on. Typically, I have a tie on. Tonight, I purposely didn't wear one.
And we're going to talk to you.
Yeah,
about that
yeah.
later on.
But no, seriously though, the serious question is, does that actually affect anybody out there? I mean, and I'm willing to bet. No, don't shake your head. No, I would think it would. I would think that somebody, at least a few people
I
out
see your
there,
point.
noticed 2 guys in a suit and tie talking about this lesson, and 1 guy with no suit and tie on, or at least no tie on. I would think somebody at least knows it. They might not have really thought so bad
Yeah,
about it.
right.
It's not a bad shirt.
Are you feeling a little bit self-conscious
no,
there, John?
not at all.
I'm feeling hot at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I don't
yeah.
typically wear a suit top on these
Yeah.
Tuesday nights, but I do typically wear a tie.
Well, let me use the virtual Bible study as an example. I know we were supposed to have ended 5 minutes ago. We're almost done. They started theirs out without a camera, so they were doing just internet radio program. And so when they made their switch to video, now if they have a gospel meeting, they keep their show going. So as soon as the gospel meeting is over with, they start the broadcast. Then they're in suits. But regular Thursday nights are just regular button-up shirts. Because that was the way they started, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But maybe someone did notice
Right.
how much sharper or more relaxed you looked.
Yeah.
You look more comfortable tonight.
Still feel a little hot in here, though.
Oh, yes. Anyway.
But Dale's comfy.
Well, that's
I am.
exactly right. Well, listen, speaking of hot, we will continue this hot topic of our apparel next Tuesday evening. And next Tuesday evening, we will get into reasons why we should seek to avoid unholy behavior in apparel. We talked about the fact we're supposed to be holy and godly. We're supposed to stand out. But we also see warnings that keep us from being like the world. Then we will get into the handful of verses that talk about apparel. And just exactly look at what the Bible has to say about that. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. We have people from all over. I am Angela over in Ireland, and I think Guest 501 is from somewhere else where it is pretty late as well. Angela, I think it's around 1:30 in the morning that the broadcast begins for her, and she's on sick leave right now recovering, so that's why she's able to stay up. And so many others. We want to thank you for joining us for our study. If you have any questions or comments, please send them to us. Send them to questions@scripturalway.org. Even if you disagree with us. We prefer scriptures, to help us better understand your position, but write to us and let us know. And Lord willing, we will see you back here again next Tuesday night at 7:30 p.m. at scripturalway.org.